countries who have opened. And my point is to our team, I want to learn from those other countries, frankly. And I want to make sure we know from our studying and assessment of what's gone on in other countries that what worked, what didn't work, and let's learn from those lessons. You can now go back and look at Wuhan province and look at Italy and look at South Korea and see what they did and see what worked and what didn't work. So let's learn.
Folks, civil rights groups sent a letter to members of Congress asking that they address two major provisions of the proposed COVID-19 relief bill that would exclude millions of immigrant families, including U.S. citizen children. Immigrants are frontline workers leading the response to the pandemic in places like public health, agriculture, food prep and delivery, and cleaning and maintenance. Joining me right now is New York Congresswoman Yvette Clarke. She is the chair of the Immigration Task Force, and whose Brooklyn district is largely made up of immigrants. Before I talk about that, Congresswoman Clarke, right now, happening at the White House, it's one of the most shameful, despicable things that we have seen. Donald Trump is literally bitching and moaning about media coverage. Now they're playing a video as we speak where he is complaining about the media's coverage. There's not been, so far yet, a single update on the coronavirus. It's all about his ego. It's all about this back and forth with Dr. Fauci, whether or not he will fire him, even though he retweeted something this weekend. I mean, I have never seen a more shameless, despicable human being occupy the Oval Office than Donald Trump. And what's happening right now is beyond shameful.
Roland, you know, we have to do all of the work for our communities despite what Donald Trump is saying and what he is not doing. It is critical right now that we focus our attention on saving lives in our community. We cannot be distracted by the Donald Trump show. He is inept. He is out of step. He is out of his league and he's in over his head. We have to look to the leadership of others within the administration, outside of the administration, and in the communities in which we live, because right now, again, he is purely a distraction in this time of an emergency crisis.
Well, there's a reason why we do not show, when he is talking, we do not waste our time showing anything from his news conference because it serves no value whatsoever. If Dr. Birx or Dr. Fauci are not at that podium, then we don't play it. And so that's why we do that on Roland Martin Unfiltered. That will always be the case. If anyone disagrees with that, that's tough. It's my show. But that's the call we'll make because this man lies way too much for us to keep giving out the information to our audience. One of the things that has happened. Go right.
It's dangerous, Roland. If he continues to be misleading to the American people, lives are on the line as we speak. Every hour that goes by in New York City, I'm hearing more and more sirens racing through the streets of my community, out there on the front lines trying to save lives. We don't have time to deal with this man's narcissism. We have to focus our energies on saving human life in the very neighborhoods and communities in which we live.
One of the things that is happening is the impact on immigrants. We had a guest on Friday, Johanna LeBlanc, talked about what is happening where they're sending people back to African nations. They sent back 68 Haitians as well. Members of Congress have said, stop doing this because you could potentially be spreading the virus there. They're not actually checking these folks before they leave. And so how they are treating immigrants during this crisis just goes to show you this anti-immigrant administration.
Well, this has been part and parcel of what we have witnessed from the day that Donald Trump was sworn in, and even before then when he came down the golden escalator. But now it has far more implications beyond just, the rhetoric, the ICE raids and everything else. It really means literally life and death. And as long as we have this virus in the Western Hemisphere, whether it's the United States, it's the Caribbean, it's Latin America, we will never be rid of the scourge of COVID-19. So it's foolhardy for him to do through his administration what he is doing. The sad part of it is that real lives are on the line. And at any point in time, we send individuals who are infected with COVID-19 into these very fragile developing nations that don't have a fraction of the healthcare infrastructure that we have here in the United States, we are in for a disaster in the making. And so I would really appeal to the State Department and those people of goodwill to really address this issue of deportations at this stage while we are still combating this virus, while we are still looking for a vaccine that could perhaps make sure that we can save lives. There's so much work that we need to do in terms of focusing on the United States population, those within our families and our communities, and making them well enough so that traveling doesn't become a dynamic where we are actually exporting and importing people, infected persons in and out of the United States of America.
One of the things that we talked about is that the reality is there are a number of people who are immigrants who are working on the front lines, who are essential workers, who are working at grocery stores, who are working at convenience stores. All of these people who are working in the medical field, all of these people who have ignored folks like this, have trashed them. It's amazing how millions of Americans are coming to depend on them.
Well, again, our economy is fully integrated, and we've just been in denial about who provides essential services in the United States of America, what the makeup and demographic of that workforce looks like, sounds like, and how they're able to be effective in our society. And we've not given them the credit nor the status that they deserve in our civil society. And now we are all paying a price for it. Because again, as you stated in the opening of your show, Roland, these are individuals that live in blended communities and blended families. Someone in the family is a citizen, could be a child, could be a sibling. Someone in the family is a resident of the United States. They have a green card, in other words. Someone may be a DACA recipient, a recipient of temporary protected status, or just be in between status, period. Someone has filed for them. They're here in the United States awaiting for that filing adjustment. There's so many ways in which we have not addressed residents of our communities who are immigrants, who are in between status, and who are the most vulnerable. We have vulnerabilities, but when it gets to the point where you have a program being rolled out that has no provision whatsoever for the health and well-being of individuals we know live and work within our communities, we are opening ourselves up for the constant spread and circulation of this virus, because these individuals will be hardest hit, will be hesitant to go and seek treatment, will be food insecure, because indeed, if they don't work, they don't get paid. And those that are working as essential employees are not getting healthcare benefits, are not receiving PPE, the personally protective equipment to be able to interface with the public. And we have, again, a circular disaster that is taking place with respect to the health and well-being of these individuals in particular, but our entire communities in its totality.
Last question for you. New York Times had a big piece over the weekend detailing the faults and failures of this administration. What was stunning to read is how they are essentially, actually NBC News had another piece talking about how they're basically aiding and abetting corporations, where the United States is paying for chartered flights for DuPont to get their material overseas a lot quicker and then bringing it back on chartered flights paid by taxpayers. PPE would normally be costing $5, and then they're selling it to the United States for $15. And then so how in the world can taxpayers be footing the bill to make PPE faster and be paying 3 times more?
It's a criminality at a whole nother level, Roland. Unfortunately, the Congress is not in session to be able to do the type of official oversight that we need to do to make sure that we hold the Trump the Trump administration accountable for taxpayer dollars. We were actually just talking about that on one of our caucus calls just a few minutes ago. The issue is profiteering. We're seeing it across this nation, how the Trump administration is using the private sector to essentially drive up the cost of products that we need in order to arrest this virus, whether it's PPE, whether it's testing materials, so that they can profit from this before it even hits the ground and hits our communities, draining the coffers of states and localities that cannot afford to purchase these products because they're being price gouged. It's really a sin. And we know that this is typical of what we can expect from a Trump administration. The challenge is now holding them accountable for what they're doing because, again, they are scamming the American people in many ways, profiting off of price gouging and setting up a system through which private interests are benefiting tenfold over taxpayer dollars for essential materials that we need to save life, to preserve life, and to get through this crisis. It's really a shame and it's a disgrace. We can't say that enough, but we're going to have to hold this administration accountable. Right now, we are in the midst of this pandemic. We are still in the emergency crisis phase. We're trying to move to relief phase, and that phase is being corrupted, unfortunately, by the Trump administration.
Congresswoman Yvette Clarke of New York, we certainly appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me, Roland.
All right, folks. I want to go right now to our panel. Robert Patillo, he is Executive Director of Rainbow Push Coalition Peachtree Street Project. Amisha Cross, political analyst and Democratic strategist. Michael Brown, former vice chair of the DNC. Michael, I want to start with you. We've talked about constantly in the failures of the administration. To read those two stories over the weekend, to read the NBC report, to read the New York Times report, to see that DuPont, in order to speed up the process, the United States taxpayers are paying for private charters that cost $1 million when we actually have access to Department of Defense planes that cost $10,000 an hour to fly these Tyvek, the material, to have them assembled in another country, and then we're flying them back. And then the federal government is letting DuPont keep 60% of what we're helping to pay for, and only 40% is going to the government, but we're actually paying $15 per PPE that normally costs $5. How in the hell is the federal government, Donald Trump, Jared Kushner, Mike Pence, they are aiding and abetting American companies ripping off taxpayers in the middle of an international pandemic?
Well, as you know, Roland, we probably should not be surprised by any of this. This is how this administration acts. This is how they conduct themselves. And with all due respect to my good friend from New York, the oversight to this administration, they ignore oversight. There's nothing you can do. They're not going to provide any documents. They're not going to be honest about how they've run their administration. You're going to have to, as we've talked about many times, when you're talking about bringing a knife to a gunfight, you're always going to lose. We have to bring a gun to a gunfight when it comes to oversight. Start turning off their money when it comes to their offices. Start doing things that they will feel, but they don't care when they get a subpoena. But this is how they act. This is how they're going to act for the next, 9 months or so. And then they're going to be out of office because President Biden will be coming in.
Amisha, here's an actual quote from the NBC News story. Here we go to my iPad. We actually helped get raw materials supplied from Richmond, Virginia, and we flew that shit to Vietnam, all so that DuPont could sell us their products, said a senior official involved in the coronavirus effort.
Just circumventing the process. What Donald Trump could have done, and what I think any president worthy of their salt would have done right now, is to convert a lot of our private sector leaders to actually supplying and being able to create a lot of what's necessary to fight COVID-19. What we've seen him do is essentially go rogue, to use private sector leadership to assist him in that process, and to be a modern day pirate when it comes to actually going and interfering in getting supplies from other nations, literally having them taken off of boats as they were being shipped to other places. So I think that this president, he's showcasing exactly who he is. We're watching day in and day out him totally create an even stronger mess of what is COVID-19, and nobody should really feel at ease right now.
Robert, to watch what is happening is stunning. The New York Times had a big piece over the weekend that showed the levels of incompetence, where they got the emails of many of these folks who were corresponding back and forth, who were saying in mid-January, this is going to explode. This is going to explode. We have a problem. Then they even had one email where a CDC official said, wait a minute, if this is correct, our models are completely wrong. To watch right now, Donald Trump is at the podium, whining, complaining, showing some crazy video. He is trying to rewrite history. It is undeniable. It is undeniable that these people absolutely, positively failed the American people. More than 22,000 people are dead, and they think it's a success if less than 100,000 people die.
Well, to do a quick throwback, remember the articles of impeachment versus President Trump. One of them was failure to cooperate with Congress, obstruction of Congress. What this administration learned from that process was they have absolutely no reason to turn over documents. There is no congressional oversight over anything that they do. There's nothing that the Congress can do to constrain anything that they attempt to do. They can rule by fiat. So right now we're seeing an intersection between Keynesian economics and Friedman's concept on a large free market, where the free market is able to use government spending to stay afloat and line their pockets at the expense of the American taxpayer, running up massive deficits which do nothing to increase employment and simply line corporate stockpiles. So we have to have a Congress which is ready to hold these people accountable, to have hearings, to do not be afraid of being on a video at President Trump's press conference, but to really have oversight over what's going on. We just gave the president a $1.5 trillion blank check where we don't know where any of the money is about to go, and we're ready to hammer through another $500 billion in spending. And if we don't have oversight, we're going to be paying this off from our grandchildren and great-grandchildren going forward.
To watch all of this play out makes it perfectly clear that if you vote for Donald Trump in November, you have no brain whatsoever. That what you're seeing is a true thug. What he did here was he got with the Chamber of Commerce said, no. Do not employ the National Defense Production Act. Don't do that. Basically, what they're saying is let big business make all the money that they can. Here we have nurses in New York and Massachusetts complaining about lack of ventilators. And what Donald Trump is doing, he is using the federal stockpile like pork barrel projects by saying, okay, they told Colorado not to stop your request for ventilators. Then he turns right around and says, oh, after getting a phone call from Senator Cory Gardner, Republican, I am sending 100 ventilators. And then he doles out another set of ventilators, Michael, to the senator from Arizona, who's in a very tough re-election. He literally is playing with the lives of Americans based upon who I can dole them out to as if they are pork barrel projects.
You're right, Roland. And first, also, let me apologize to you and to your listeners. The pollen has wrapped around my vocal cords. It's that time of year, so I apologize.
I understand. We understand.
I think you can hear me okay.
Yeah, we got you.
As we talked about last time I happened to be on, we talked about that he's playing red state and blue state politics. He does that with everything, whether it's impeachment, whether it's in infrastructure, which has not gotten off the ground. Now, with COVID-19, everything is about who's a red governor, who's a blue governor. Andrew Cuomo keeps talking about me. But if you notice, there are a lot of Republican governors who are also not pleased with how he has been conducting himself. Now, the ones deep in the trenches with him, they will always defend him. They won't keep people at home. They want to keep their businesses open because they want their economies to be okay come November, so he can say, look, in Kentucky, well, Kentucky's a bad example because you have a Democratic governor. But the governors you just mentioned that happen to be Republican, they can say to their voters, support Donald Trump. The economy's great in our state. Don't worry about what's going on in the rest of the country. Focus on what's happening here.
We can just simply not deny what is happening here. He can play all the videos that he wants to, Robert. He can push this stuff out. But what Donald Trump cannot do, now granted, let's be honest, he throws out fake news. In fact, it was hilarious to watch the White House blame the media for the fire of Fauci stuff when it was Donald Trump who was the one who retweeted somebody who were saying fire Fauci. And what you have here is somebody who is he's not just a known liar. He will lie about a lie. And there's nothing you can trust that comes out of his mouth. And so he is going to play this game. And unfortunately, his supporters are some of the most gullible people you've ever seen. And they will fall for the lie and the okey doke every single time and swear he is the greatest thing since Jesus. In fact, they actually believe that he's probably even more important than Jesus.
Well, one point I wanted to circle back to is when you were discussing the patronage with the ventilators. I don't think we've done a great job explaining to people why the ventilators are so important. The way that the COVID-19 disease works is that you have a RNA strain which reproduces and therefore attacks the alveoli in the lungs, which triggers a cytokine storm, which triggers inflammation and fluid within the lungs. As the lungs try to push the fluid through the system, just like when you're lifting weights with any muscle, they wear out and can no longer operate on their own. Without these ventilators, which cost between $25,000 and $50,000, and now with interstate bidding, sometimes up to $75,000 per unit per ventilator. The only thing that it can allow a person to maintain respiration long enough for their immune system to fight off the virus are these ventilators. And even with that, 70% of people worldwide who go onto ventilators end up dying from the virus of the number of people who have recovered thus far. So when we talk about giving out ventilators based on political preference, you are literally deciding life or death. It's not as if these people just want this as a luxury item or if it's something nice to have. And then there's these discussions about manual ventilation, which causes a barrel disease where you rip the lining of the lungs and the person dies anyway. Or when they talk about splitting the ventilators, what you have to do is put both parties into a comatose state so that their bodies can be on the same rhythm with the ventilator in order for them to split that ventilator. So we have to have these apparatuses in production. We have the Defense Production Act, where we could have put in place in January to allow some of these industries that have the ability to take publicly available plans, retool, and get them out there to the public. But instead, we're doing this dog chases its tail thing, where we, for some reason, do not want to believe in medical science, do not want to believe the research that comes out, and we're so busy talking about magical pills and voodoo prescriptions that are going to magically save everybody that we aren't doing what we know is actually effective.
Amisha, what people need to understand is that what we are facing right now is a dysfunctional government that is favoring the rich over those who are in need. We have a government led by Donald Trump that truly does not care about people. This is a man who will stand at that podium, will not say anything comforting to the people who have lost lives. 4,000 more people died since this point Friday. That means a 9/11 tragedy happened over the weekend, and all this man can do is to stand at a podium and bitch about his media coverage. Like right now, I believe this briefing started at 5 o'clock. The tweet said the briefing was at 5 o'clock Eastern. Right now, it is 6:31 Eastern, which means they have been talking for an hour and a half and no real coronavirus update. It's all about his ego.
the numbers are what they are, and this president cannot reshape or redefine what's happening in this country. So he would rather use his attacks on the media. That has been his focus for a very long time. It was his focus when he was running for election. It's been his focus since he got to the White House. His favorite news channel is now OANN, One America News. He is no longer a fan of Fox, and he is utilizing them and their platform to help to rally his base. He wants to take as much attention off of his poor leadership and his response to COVID-19 as possible. He is attacking, and as you stated earlier, with his retweets, that was a direct attack and a level of support for the removal of Dr. Fauci. He is someone who does not want to give the governorship, and the governor states where it's actually working. He doesn't want to give them credit for the work that they're doing. He also he wants these states to have to compete for federal attention. He wants to be the president who only helps those who he considers his friends. If you are a Republican who has fundraised, who has said nice things about him, you can expect to see your ventilators. If you are not someone who has been on that side, then you can expect to suffer and your people will die. That is essentially what President Trump is telling America. He gets to pick and choose who is worthy of living and who is worthy of dying. And right now, he feels as though if you're not a Republican who has stood by him and who will carry his water, then you don't matter. If you're a Democrat, you definitely don't matter. And we're watching, the fallout across communities of color, immigrant communities, and communities across the United States.
All right, folks. And again, an ad posted on social media reminds us who we're dealing with in the Oval Office right now.
Midnight in Washington. The lights are finally going out in the Capitol after a long day in the impeachment trial of Donald J. Trump. You can't trust this president to do the right thing, not for 1 minute, not for one election, not for the sake of our country. You just can't.
Bing, bing, bong, bong.
He will not change, and you know it. History will not be kind to Donald Trump. I think we all know that, not because it will be written by never-Trumpers, but because whenever we have departed from the values of our nation, we have come to regret it, and that regret is written all over the pages of our history. If you find that the House has proved its case and still vote to acquit, your name will be tied to his with a cord of steel and for all of history. He has betrayed our national security. He has compromised our elections, and he will do so again. You will not change him. You cannot constrain him. Truth matters little to him. What's right matters even less, and decency matters not at all. We have proven Donald Trump guilty. Now do impartial justice and convict him.
While we air that, well, Donald Trump is actually suing local TV stations for airing ads such as that because he doesn't